Tonight, the world just watched America's flag come under attack. Not on a distant battlefield halfway across the globe, hidden behind deserts and mountains, but at a place that should be untouchable, at our own embassy. In Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, 2 drones struck the U.S. embassy, flames erupted, smoke filled the air, and suddenly the war in the Middle East. A war most Americans think is someone else's problem is no longer distant. It's on our doorstep. It's in our diplomatic missions. And yet, remarkably, most Americans haven't even heard about it. Most Americans, if you ask them today, wouldn't know a single detail about what just happened. Let's make this very clear. When a foreign power targets our embassy, when they send unmanned, armed aircraft into the very compound where American diplomats live and work, that is not an accident. That is not a minor incident. That is a deliberate, calculated message, a warning, a challenge. And tonight, Iran may have just drawn a line in the sand. They are daring the United States to respond. They are daring Washington to prove that American power is more than a symbol, that it is real, that it is capable, and that it will not be mocked. No, I want to be honest with you. The story you are about to hear is disturbing. It's frightening even, because what we are watching is not just another episode in a decades-long Middle Eastern drama. This is escalation. It's an escalation that brings war closer to home, that raises questions about America's safety, its interests, and yes, the lives of Americans, both at home and abroad. And the fact that this news is being largely ignored by the media is itself a warning. They are not telling you the full story. They are not telling you the consequences. So tonight we will break it down, step by step, how we got here, why Iran did what it did, what this means for U.S. policy, and most importantly, what you, the American public, need to understand about the dangers unfolding thousands of miles from here, but closer than anyone might think. Because this isn't just a headline, this is a story that matters. And it's one that deserves your full attention. The question is simple: how do we get here? And what happens next? That's exactly what we're going to investigate tonight. Here's what we know. 2 drones. Not 1, but 2. They struck the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh with precision. 1 fire reported. No casualties so far. A relief, yes, but don't let that fool you. The absence of immediate loss of life does not make this any less serious. The embassy is a symbol, a sacred symbol of American power abroad. To target it is to make a statement: we can reach you. We can strike where it matters most. Now, some will try to downplay this. They'll say it's just a small attack. No one was hurt. It's isolated. That's nonsense. Pure nonsense. This is not an isolated incident. And the intention here is very clear. Iran, whether directly or through proxies, whether openly or clandestinely, is sending a message: America is vulnerable. Your diplomats are vulnerable, and your allies are vulnerable. The idea that this is minor is precisely the kind of thinking that gets people killed. Let's think about the logistics for a moment. 2 drones, coordinated, reaching Riyadh's diplomatic quarter undetected until it was too late. That's sophistication. That's planning. That's not the work of amateurs. This was a targeted strike, a precision operation meant to demonstrate capability and audacity. And it worked. The world watched, or at least those paying attention did. And Washington has to ask itself, how do we respond without escalating? How do we defend our interests without walking into a trap? Because make no mistake, every detail of this attack, from trajectory to timing, was meant to test the U.S. response. Why would Iran do this? Simple. Strategic signaling. They want to show they can strike at U.S. interests anywhere in the Middle East. And yes, that includes allied nations. Riyadh is not Tehran. Saudi Arabia is a strong partner, an ally, a pillar of stability in the region. To strike there is to show that America's protective reach has limits. And the subtext is unmistakable. We can hit where it hurts, and you cannot stop us. That is a message Washington must take seriously. And it's not just theory. Think about the psychology here. Diplomats, personnel, Americans overseas, they are supposed to feel secure in embassies. That's the entire point. When that security is violated, it shakes confidence, it undermines morale, it projects fear. And fear is a weapon. It's subtle, invisible, and incredibly powerful. Iran understands that. The United States cannot afford to misread it. But this isn't happening in isolation. Far from it. To understand this attack, you have to look at the bigger picture, the context in which it occurs. A week ago, the U.S. and Israel conducted strikes against Iranian targets. These were deliberate, tactical strikes aimed at degrading Iran's capabilities, and Tehran's response has been swift, sharp, and increasingly aggressive. Look at the map. The Gulf region is a tinderbox: oil infrastructure, shipping lanes, military bases. All of these are potential targets. And every time America acts against Iran, Tehran retaliates, sometimes directly, sometimes through proxies: Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and now Saudi Arabia. This is not random. It is a pattern, it is escalation, and it is designed to test Washington's patience. And there is a very practical element. Here, U.S. bases across the region are now on high alert. Troops are monitoring for missile threats, drone threats, and unconventional attacks. Commanders are revising contingency plans. Intelligence analysts are working around the clock. And yet, the average American, they are largely unaware. Most people assume that somehow America is insulated from this chaos. But it's closer than they think. Every attack, every move, every threat reverberates. It affects oil prices. It affects shipping lanes. It affects global markets. And yes, it affects the likelihood of direct military conflict. Let's not forget the human element. Civilians in the region, not just Americans, but locals, foreign workers, allied nationals, live under the shadow of these tensions. An attack on an embassy is more than symbolic. It is a real danger to real people. And that is something policymakers in Washington must reckon with every day. Make no mistake, this is exactly the kind of multi-front escalation that risk analysts warned could spiral out of control. And spiraling out of control is exactly what we may be witnessing tonight. Because for every strike, there is a counterstrike. For every act of aggression, there is retaliation. And the cycle, unless carefully managed, can become self-perpetuating, uncontrollable, catastrophic. So what does this mean for Washington? For the civilians and diplomats stationed across the Gulf? For the troops who serve overseas in bases that are suddenly under threat? The implications are profound. Decisions that were once theoretical, debated in conference rooms, now have immediate consequences. Every political miscalculation, every delayed response risks pulling the United States into a wider war. And let's be clear, these are not hypothetical risks. They are very real. Think about the chain reaction here. The U.S. responds with force. Iran escalates. Allies in the Gulf become involved. Civilians are caught in the crossfire. Shipping lanes are disrupted. Oil prices skyrocket. The global economy feels the shockwaves. And all of this could have been mitigated if America had understood, anticipated, and planned for Tehran's moves. That's the reality of modern diplomacy, of modern conflict. It's fast, ruthless, and unforgiving. And there is another dimension, the perception of American resolve. If the U.S. is slow to respond, cautious to a fault, Iran will interpret that as weakness, and weakness invites more aggression. So the balancing act is delicate: how to respond decisively without being reckless, without triggering the very war we seek to avoid. It is a test of strategic patience, of judgment, and of political courage. And tonight, Washington is under that test. Meanwhile, back home, the public remains largely oblivious. Most Americans think these events are distant, abstract, irrelevant to their daily lives. But the truth is the opposite. A conflict in the Gulf has ripple effects here, on Main Street, in grocery stores, at the gas pump. Military deployments, embassy security, oil prices, even the safety of American citizens abroad, all are directly affected. Ignorance in this case is not bliss. It is dangerous, and it is precisely why media coverage matters. Because understanding the stakes is the first step toward accountability, toward preparedness, toward national security. Let's talk strategy. Because make no mistake, there is a method to this madness. Targeting an embassy isn't just about destruction. It's about sending a message that is precise, psychological, and unmistakable. Iran wants Washington to understand something fundamental: strike at us, and we will strike back. And we will strike back in unexpected ways, in unexpected places. Not just in turn, not just in missile silos, but anywhere we see a vulnerability, including your diplomatic missions. This is psychological warfare wrapped in real-world consequences. And the danger here is obvious. Our response so far has been cautious. Too cautious, calculated, measured. But there is a risk to measured responses. Inaction, hesitation, or delay can be misread as weakness. And that's exactly what Tehran is counting on. They are testing the boundaries of American resolve. They are probing to see how far they can go before Washington finally acts. That is the nature of deterrence. That is the nature of modern conflict. Consider the history. Iran has consistently used proxies, drones, missile attacks, and cyber operations to project power without engaging directly in a conventional war. And time and again, America has responded with limited strikes, carefully calibrated sanctions, or verbal warnings. In many ways, these responses are predictable. They signal restraint, yes, but they also reveal patterns. And patterns are predictable. Iran studies these patterns, they exploit them, they push the envelope. And tonight, we see that envelope being pushed farther than ever before. This is not just theory. This is operational reality. The drones over Riyadh were a demonstration of capability, yes, but also a demonstration of intent. The message is clear: the United States may be strong, but it is not invincible. Its embassies, its personnel, its allies all are within reach. And if the U.S. fails to understand this, to grasp the psychological as well as the strategic implications, the consequences could be severe. We are witnessing a new chapter in asymmetric warfare, one in which perception, calculation, and messaging are as powerful as bombs, missiles, and troops. And let's be frank, there is a political dimension to this as well. By attacking an embassy, Iran also aims to test the domestic appetite for war in the United States. Will Americans demand retaliation? Will Congress authorize it? Or will political divisions, partisan gridlock, and media distraction leave Tehran free to act with impunity? These are not abstract questions. They are questions of strategy, and the answers matter. Because in the Middle East, hesitation can be deadly, delay can be costly, and miscalculation can be catastrophic. Ultimately, the Iranian message is as much about perception as it is about reality. They want the world, and particularly the United States, to believe that they are capable, daring, and willing to escalate. They want you to pay attention, and they want policymakers in Washington to sweat. That is exactly what this attack accomplishes. It puts pressure on the United States politically, militarily, and psychologically, and it does so without the need for a full-scale conventional engagement. That, my friends, is the brilliance of this strategy. And that, my friends, is the danger. So what does this mean for you, for the American public, for those sitting at home, scrolling through headlines or catching snippets of news on cable networks? The truth is, it matters a lot. This is not about politics, partisanship, or ideology. This is about national security. It is about the safety of our diplomats, the protection of our military personnel, the stability of the global economy, and the consequences of ignoring it are real, immediate, and potentially devastating. Let's start with oil. The Middle East remains the world's energy heart. When conflict escalates and the Gulf oil markets react, prices rise, gasoline costs climb at the pump, heating, manufacturing, transportation, everything that relies on energy is affected. And it is not just domestic energy concerns, global markets feel the pressure too. Rising prices, uncertainty, instability, these are the economic consequences of conflict, and they happen quickly. Then there's the human element. Americans living abroad, diplomats, business people, tourists are increasingly at risk. Evacuations become necessary. Travel advisories increase. Every attack on U.S. assets overseas is a direct risk to lives. This is not abstract. This is real, and it demands attention from policymakers, from the press, and from the public. Americans need to know that the world is not safe simply because they are far from it. Distance does not equal security. Next, consider the military dimension. Troops stationed in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar are facing a new threat environment. Bases are now potential targets. Supply chains are at risk. Commanders must adjust strategy, posture, and readiness constantly. Every deployment carries the potential for escalation. And while military officials are trained for these contingencies, the public rarely sees or appreciates the scale of the challenge. That disconnect is dangerous. Public awareness is essential for informed debate and accountable leadership. Finally, there is the strategic lesson. This attack and others like it are teaching us a hard truth. Diplomacy without deterrence is vulnerable. Patience without preparation is risky, and restraint without clarity is dangerous. America must understand the risk before it acts, but it must also understand the consequences of inaction. Because failing to see the full picture does not make the threat disappear, it only makes it more likely to catch us unprepared. And that is the story that deserves attention. To get perspective on all this, we spoke with analysts who study Middle Eastern policy, Iran strategy, and American military posture. Their assessments are clear and frankly alarming. One analyst described this as the most direct attack on U.S. diplomatic personnel in decades. Think about that. Decades. And yet, in the mainstream press, it barely registers as news. Another expert warned, and I quote, "If Washington misreads Tehran's intent, this could rapidly evolve into a multi-front war." Multi-front. That means U.S. interests across the region, allies like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, and even shipping lanes and infrastructure could suddenly become targets. One miscalculation, one wrong signal, and the consequences are profound. That is not alarmism. That is analysis. And it is exactly the type of perspective that should be informing public discussion, and it isn't. We also spoke with military advisors who emphasized that these drones over Riyadh are not just weapons. They are intelligence tools. They gather information, test responses, and assess vulnerabilities. Every attack carries dual purposes, tactical impact and strategic signaling. That's why it's so dangerous to ignore them, to treat them as isolated incidents. Each strike is part of a larger pattern, a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to provoke, intimidate, and shape American behavior. But then there's history. If you look back over decades, Iran has repeatedly used asymmetrical tactics to leverage power without engaging in a conventional war. They have tested U.S. patience repeatedly, probing vulnerabilities, gauging political and military responses, and shaping their own strategy based on what they observe. In this sense, the attack on the Riyadh embassy is entirely consistent with past behavior, but it is also a significant escalation. Because now the attack is on U.S. personnel in a sovereign allied nation with a level of precision and audacity that marks a new phase in this ongoing conflict. Tucker, continuing, so what does all this mean for Americans watching from home? It means that the stakes are higher than they realize. The risks are immediate. And the story, the full story, is being told in fragments, if at all. That's why tonight we break it down, because understanding the context, the implications, and the strategy is not just for policymakers or analysts. It's for every American who cares about safety, stability, and the consequences of events unfolding thousands of miles away, but closer than most imagine. The world has changed overnight. Drones over Riyadh are not a distant headline. They are a warning to America, to its policymakers, and to the public. A line has been crossed, and yet, look around. The public conversation remains muted. The mainstream media is reluctant to cover this fully or to place it in the context it deserves. That silence is itself a risk, because what we do not discuss, we cannot understand. What we ignore, we cannot prepare for. And what we underestimate, we cannot respond to effectively. So pay attentively, ask questions, and demand answers, because ignoring this now could mean facing consequences later, consequences that will affect every American. This isn't speculation. This isn't political hyperbole. This is the reality of national security in a world where conflict can erupt far from our shores and yet touch every aspect of our lives. Drones in Riyadh may seem distant, but the message is clear. American interests, American lives, and American power are all within reach. And how we respond, both publicly and strategically, will define our security for years to come. Remember this, flags are more than symbols. They are warnings. They are statements of present sovereignty and resilience. And tonight, one of ours was attacked. That is not just news. That is a call to awareness, a call to understanding, and yes, a call to action. Because in the end, national security is not something that happens somewhere else. It is something that touches every American. And the time to understand it is now. Tucker, final reflection. So as you turn off your screens tonight, as you go about your lives, remember this moment. Remember that the war in the Middle East is no longer distant. Remember that American embassies can be struck and that the consequences ripple outward faster than most people can perceive. And most importantly, remember that our attention, our understanding, and our resolve are as important as any military action, because it is attention, clarity, and vigilance that will determine how the United States navigates this new and dangerous chapter in its history.